Alright then. A few days ago, Carlos asked me to create some content for the temple, uh, whereas I would speak to you on various topics. Um, it's been quite a while since I've done a sermon, and so this is quite apt. It's been 4 years since I've been the pastor of the temple. I was succeeded by those who carried on much better than I did. Um, but anyway, I first want to apologize. I am not a professional documentarist. I don't know how to make videos very well. I know that the video and the audio quality are probably total rubbish, but that's not really, the point here. I'm not trying to create entertainment for you. I'm trying to just, fulfill the request and share some of my uptakes on these topics. Actually, the first topic that I would like to discuss was the second topic that was offered, and that was the one by Arianis asking about relationships. And it's a very good question, and I won't be able to make an inexhaustible discourse on it. I would like to remind us that we are constantly in relation to something else. It seems that often whenever we think about relationships, we think about particular relationships, to particular people or to particular groups of people, or to particular groups of people in specific circumstances. Or often we think of the relationships that we would like to have with a person, or it's almost impossible to imagine all the combinations of types of relationships that we can have. It is not, however, impossible to categorize them. Stephen Pinker from Harvard has actually done a pretty good job with that. He counts 3 types of relationships that we have: domination, reciprocity, and conviviality. I believe in that. Domination, that is, our relationships with hierarchic superiors. They're ones who have some sort of authority over us, and we are just, by nature of that relationship, we're put in a submissive posture. Now, by submissive, I don't mean, that we have to, bend over and like the Japanese bowing, and although, the cultural relativism, says that, there are those cultures that, must respect that. Here in the West, we have our own customs for showing respect to superiors. Sometimes these relationships overlap, but I'll get to that later, perhaps. Reciprocity relationships. These can be tricky because we often like the idea of thinking that our relationships to others are indeed reciprocal. There's, what is offered in return. And this is not exactly the most ideal. A reciprocity relationship is, say, for instance, someone who has a restaurant, and you go to the restaurant to have a meal. At the end of the meal, you pay for the meal. You pay for not only the food but also the ambience, also the service. And this is why our reciprocity relationships are always based on giving something in expectation of receiving something in return. Now, when we think about our ideal relationships, or when we idealize about the type of relationships we would like to have with particular other people, especially friendships or romantic interests, well then we do not want those to be reciprocal relationships. What we want is a conviviality relationship. That means that there is no question of payback or owing, or it's just two people relating to one another. Well, maybe more than two people, but nevertheless, we want our friendships and our lovers to be there for us. We want to share the relationship. It's not service offered, service rendered, service and then payment for that service. It would be really, really awful if that's how we conducted our conviviality relationships. So, anyway, that's that. What gives, what provides, what engenders, what brings about relationships with people? First and foremost, presence, being there. It has only been very recently that human beings have been so numerous on the planet. I think that when I was born, there was something like 4 billion people on the planet, and we've come along. We've got 3.5 billion. It's almost doubled. The human population on the planet has almost doubled during my lifetime. When my father was born, there were probably less than 2 billion people on the planet. There has been such a swelling of our population during the 20th century that we have come to think of, we people are all around us. And so we tend to look at them more or less as obstacles rather than, which if you think about it, well then that's just another type of relationship. We have a relationship to an obstacle. It's not necessarily a very good relationship, but then we relate to the obstacle as something we have to get around or under or over or through. But I think the problem with our relationships, given this first question about what brings relationships about, we need presence. We need to be there. We need to understand that the other is another human being. The other is another experience of I. It's another ego. Ego is not a dirty word. Ego simply means I, a phenomenal experience of life. We are all the center of the universe, so to speak. Everything that we can perceive, everything that we can have a feeling about, everything that we can intellect that feeling about is going to be what it means to me. This is why, Heidegger talked about, Sorge, care. What do we care about? And so it's that presence with care that brings about the relationship. And that's what also, gets the relationship going. Are we, I'm saying a lot, I'm sorry, I have a tick like that. Presence is what gives us relationship. Integrity, being authentic, not necessarily portraying a role or thinking about what one should be feeling, but then actually having that feeling, extending empathy toward the other. Now this is not sufficient for compassion, but at least being able to make the imaginative leap to put oneself in someone else's place. What is their experience? What are their memories? What are their aspirations, their hopes, their fears, based on their past experience? Because we've got past experience that make us, that governs our imagination for the future also. I think what makes relationships difficult is just that idea of, well, let's go back to the reciprocity idea. It's like when we do something for someone else, we're expecting something else in return. That's a misnomer. That's a category error. We ought to do things for people just because it's the right thing to do. Now, this is much easier said than done. We've all grown up during the 20th century. We have all grown up, with the idea. We've all grown up pretty comfortably, actually. When with our great-grandparents or our grandparents or our parents having fought in wars where they actually did experience, very dire difficulties, well then they understood, the value of human connection. Whereas to us, human connection is something that it's often got a goal attached to it. It's got, we have expectations of other people. We consider what other people ought to or ought not to do. And there are things that we all ought and ought not do to one another or for one another. Nevertheless, communication, honest, authentic communication, is what drives our relationships the best. It's now authentic. Please realize that whenever I say authentic, that does not mean just blurting out whatever comes across your mind. Your authenticity has to be integral. It has to be within. You may have to be polite to someone who is very impolite. We may have to be kind to an arsehole. But authenticity is knowing oneself, how one feels, recognizing our feelings, being able to intellect those feelings, feel then about that intellection. I'm not talking about intellectualization, I'm talking about intellecting. That is just whenever we are recognizing what we're feeling. What's the limbic brain, what's the reptilian brain telling us? It's like we've got to be able to manage our amygdala. There is a constant communication between the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex and all of it, but then I'm not going to get into a lot of neuroscience here. That's just But consciously, what we can do is, first of all, be honest with ourselves. How do we feel about this other person? How do we feel about these other people? How do we feel about this set of circumstances, these situations, and what is our place within all that? What can we bring to a relationship, whether it be with one person or with many? How can we make the situation better? How can we live out the creed? How can we be an instrument of love? How can we be an instrument of peace? How can we help those in a position of weakness? How can we, I don't say we should destroy the wicked, undo the wicked. I think that perhaps the wicked are the people who are suffering the most and have the most difficulty managing their relationships. So what can we do to make them not so wicked? A lot of that has to do with just extending and understanding as to what has gone on in this person's life. What sort of trauma has this person faced that makes them so poisonous? And we may never know, but we can, by our own experiences, we can understand that, we suffer. And if we suffer ourselves, well, that means that others suffer also. And sometimes we handle that suffering well, and sometimes we handle it very badly. Anyway, I don't really want to get into the specifics of relationships here. I just wanted to break it down into that there is more than one sort of relationship. There are at least three. Relationship just means relating in whatever way we can to a person, a group of people, or a group of people in a set of circumstances. And the best way we can go about doing that is just by being focused, being present, and bringing forth the best of ourselves. That may even be the most vulnerable part of ourselves, rather than the strongest part of ourselves. We can do this again. I would like to discuss this topic now that I've had this particular discourse. I didn't prepare anything. All I did was take your questions, and I'm answering them as though we were actually just sitting here having tea. Although, if we were sitting here having tea, I would not be doing all the talking. Anyway, I hope that you've enjoyed this particular segment. I will get to the other questions later. And so, anyway, please give me some feedback, okay? May the force be with you. Wrong mouse. There we go. Now, may the force be with you.